Thank you for the Center for Kurdish Progress for organizing this very important panel discussion on Zoom. This evening, we will speak about a very important country, Turkey, namely. So, and about some specific difficulties which the AKP and MHP government under Erdogan's leadership is producing in the recent years. And this evening, we have an expert, Johannes de Jong, director of Sallux, which is based in Netherlands. And Johannes is very active and lobbying for human rights, particularly criticizing Turkey because Turkey is not fulfilling its obligation according to the international law. Johannes has done a lot for the oppressed Christians in Middle East, particularly in Syria after the war. And for the Kurds, he is also lobbying in the US and in the European Parliament. And last year, Johannes and his team published a very important report about the misuse of the NATO membership of Turkey, particularly the well-known Article 5. I think he will explain further what does it mean, Article 5. But the first question I would like to talk with you, Johannes, is we all know that Turkey is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violating international law by occupying, for example, the Kurdish city Afrin in 2018, and then Grisipi, Serikani in 2019. And Turkey is permanently using airstrikes in the territory of Iraq in southern Kurdistan. Turkey was invading or Turkey made interventions in the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and Turkey was also trying to use the European countries against each other in the issue of the East Mediterranean Sea. So one can say Turkey is threatening stability, not just in Middle East, but also in North Africa and Caucasus, in Mediterranean Sea. And the question is, why can Turkey go without being charged for the crimes? What makes Turkey so untouchable?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me in this event. And I'm very honored to be here now online with the Center for Kurdish Progress. And I'm very happy to see you again, Nilufer, and that you are well. And thank you for your question. Let me try to answer that. So this is actually the reason, your question is actually the reason that we published this publication. You basically highlighted in your introduction all these separate facts. Now, what we see everywhere in Europe, whether it will be the European Parliament, or whether it be national parliaments, or whether it be the Senate, US Senate, or the US Congress, in all these situations, you see a big divide between the politicians who are elected, who represent the people, and on the one hand, and the ministries of foreign affairs, the corps diplomatique, the ambassadors, and ministries of economic affairs on the other hand. So there's a big divide between the elected and the unelected, so to say. You see the same with the European External Action Service vis-a-vis the European Parliament. Again, the elected versus the unelected. And the problem is, I think that the unelected are not really touched by any of the developments that are taking place. While you can always see in the elected that they are being touched by these developments, that they are concerned. But the problem is this, and this is exactly what this publication deals with. So this publication What it does a number of things. First of all, it explains in context what Turkey has been doing since 2013, what the connection is between all these events, why Turkey is doing it, so what drives this agenda, and then finally, how can elected representatives do something about it? Here's the problem. Many activists are addressing the elected. They go to the people who are elected. And then many of these elected people are actually pressing the system, so to say. But the system is not budging. The system is not interested. Why is it not interested? Because it has other interests in mind as far as we are concerned. It is more interested in the interests of big business, the shareholders, and so on, and not really interested in the real security impact of all of this on average European citizens, on the real people on the ground in Syria, Iraq, Armenia, Iraq, or the Mediterranean, because they are not touched by the same threats and dangers as most average people. And in a sense, the average peoples of the Netherlands or any other country are on the same side as average people in northern Syria, northern Iraq, Iraq, or the Mediterranean. So we have an interesting situation here. How to bring these sides actually together in an effective force that will deal effectively and democratically with this situation. Because what you see often is that the elected address the situation of what's happening without really understanding the context of everything, of these various acts. And so our publication is describing these various acts since 2013, putting them in context and explaining why Turkey is doing this, that it is being driven by this extremist Islamist agenda. But it doesn't mean anything about Islam. It only says something about Turkey's use of it. So, and what we then do is say, look, the elected are pushing, for example, to remove Turkey from NATO, which is legally not possible. Or the elected are pushing for sanctions, which are then sent, they run in the ground. There's all kinds of sand in the wheels. There's all kinds of other interests that come in play, because when it comes to the execution of the implementation of measures like sanctions, you will need the civil servants. You will need the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You will need the Ministries of Economic Affairs. And then have wholly different interests come into play. And at the European level, when it comes to sanctions, for example, of course, the interests between countries come into play. And the German interests are different than the Greek interests. And the problem that arises from that, and we can see that even in the last few months, is that, for example, sanctions are being postponed and not happening, and Turkey is not put on the blacklist of the countries who are participating in tax evasion and all of that, or giving ground to allowing tax evasion to happen, and all of that. So the thing is that activists need to be able to present the whole picture and not just one issue. And then at the same time, give politicians something that will not give them the insight only, but also a concrete instrument to effectively address the situation. Now, what does it mean? It means that you must come to the point that Turkey is forced to consider its own security first before it goes on to aggression outside Turkey. Now, at the moment, Turkey is being protected, so to say, by its NATO membership, by its unconditional NATO membership. So what we are suggesting is make this membership conditional in a way. That means that the full application of the membership of NATO will not apply to Turkey unless and until it ceases with its aggression abroad and hopefully also at home. But first of all, simply abroad. Because it is not possible, I think, fully for NATO to really change the domestic situation of Turkey, but that's very difficult. But at least there can be serious consequences.
But do you think
it's situation?
Can I ask you then in between? Do you think it's for Turkey, for the NATO's benefit, if Turkey is occupying northern Syria, for example?
No, that is the point that we are making in this publication.
I mean, it's violating NATO rules because all the states has sovereignty.
Yeah, clearly. But what we are making is...
Don't you think NATO has its mechanism to stop Turkey?
No, yes and no. Let me explain this one. And that is precisely the heart of this publication. So what we are telling members of parliament, and often they don't know that, and this is one other gap in the understanding. So you have members of parliament with small staff who are sitting there with a zillion issues and this issue, versus huge apparatus of many civil servants who all know about all the issues. So what this publication does is give these MPs the full package in one go, right? So, and then we explain them, actually, NATO has a hidden, so to say, mechanism to deal with this, which is all in Article 5. Now, what is Article 5 of the NATO Treaty? Which goes to the heart of it. It goes to the heart of it. So basically the Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is the very heart of the NATO, which says we will defend each other. That's in Article 5. So if you are attacked, we will defend you. That's in Article 5. Now, a lot of people think, all right, that's there. We can't change anything about it. And that's not true. And this is what this publication does. It's explaining to members of parliament, and I have to give credits here to my colleague Christian Meijnen, who wrote this publication with me, who cannot be here today due to Corona, sadly. We're hoping that will be restored soon to our good health. But he specifically pointed me to this single point, that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is not unconditional, is not an automatism. And a lot of people, including me at first, don't know that. I didn't know that. So what we did is to put, so to say, my knowledge of what happened and the why, together with his knowledge on this specific issue. And this is how we created this publication. Now, what is the case? The NATO website itself, which is the most authoritative source actually for understanding Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, explains the workings, so to say, the inner workings of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, how you need to read that. Now, what does it say? It says, the NATO website says very clearly that that when the NATO Treaty was drafted, the European participants, so the European states in the NATO at that moment, wanted to ensure that the United States would automatically come to their assistance should one of the signatories be under attack. And the United States didn't want to make that commitment. So what did they do? They wrote Article 5 of the NATO Treaty in such a way that it is not automatic. The US inserted the words, such action as it, which is the member state that could help the other member state, deems necessary. And with that, as the NATO website explains clearly and literally so, precisely to avoid, I'm quoting the NATO website, any automatic duty to aid NATO members if they are attacked. So the NATO website explains black and white, very clearly, no, there is no automatic duty to defend, in this case, Turkey. Now, what does that mean? From this explanation provided by the NATO website, so by NATO itself, it is clear that it is possible for NATO member states, and certainly for parliaments of NATO member states, which is a specific important point, to clarify to Turkey, look, if you continue to do this, you are threatening our security. And as long as you are threatening our security, undermining our security at home and abroad, that means inside NATO member states and outside member states and NATO member states, Turkey is undermining the security of NATO member states through its extremist agenda, through its occupation agenda. And through that, it is acting against the purpose of NATO, which is to restore and maintain the security of NATO area, which is so the North Atlantic area. So Turkey is acting against it. And for that reason, parliaments could simply inform Turkey, as long as you continue to do that, as long as you occupy Afrin, northeast Syria and Artsakh, as long as you are putting jihadists in Libya, as long as you are threatening Greece and Cyprus, we will not defend you. You have to end this. And only then we will again consider that we will defend you in case you are attacked in Turkey. Now, this is a very important point, because some people try to get away with this to say, yeah, we will not defend Turkey when it is outside Turkey. No, no, no. The precise idea of this is that you can say, we will not defend Turkey itself as Turkey, so Turkey proper, so to say, if it is attacked, for example, by Russia. Now, that would be the one scenario, not necessarily the only one, but one scenario. Now, if NATO parliaments, if parliaments of NATO member states would tell their government, look, the majority of this parliament simply gives you no green light if Turkey is attacked to send our army to defend Turkey. This is basically what this publication as conclusion is proposing, that activists should pursue. Why? Because it would immediately make Turkey very vulnerable in Turkey itself. It would immediately clarify for all those who have a problem with Turkey that Turkey is no longer being defended by anybody else, that it will be on its own and completely on its own. It would also help basically our own security, because it would end any Turkish aggression outside Turkey if Turkey wanted to get this protection back. In any case,
let's talk about Johannes.
Yeah.
The concrete picture of the recent years of Turkey's membership in the NATO, and regarding Article 5, which is saying if one of the member states is attacked, then other member states has to help.
Yes.
So that's what I understand.
Yeah.
So, but we have seen since 2013 or since 2011, particularly after the war in Syria, Turkey is violating all the rules of the NATO, the UN, because it's invading in foreign territories, of the countries which are sovereign, like Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and other countries. So is NATO really interested using Turkey for its expansion, or what is the reason why? Because it's clear, let's say last week, for example, Turkey was trying to invade in southern Kurdistan by the war of Gari, which took 4 days time. So, and it's very clear it's happening publicly.
Yes.
So, and these Turkey can't say somebody has attacked me.
No.
Nobody attacked Turkey. So
No, that's clear. Now let me give you a very strange question and an answer at the same time. So what I'm going to say is a rhetorical question. What is NATO? Now we always think like NATO is that building in Brussels, you know, one ugly building in Brussels, with some generals and officials in it and so on, and they decide everything. This is not the case. Okay. NATO is composed of the NATO member states. It's something like this. It's almost as you say, you know, Washington, D.C. is America, or the United Kingdom is the same as London, or Europe is Brussels. No, we will all say, no, that is not the case. Come on. And so NATO is not simply that organization. NATO is all these member states of the NATO together. Now, what we then see, if we go beyond this kind of blurry picture, and if we go to the precise picture, then we come back to this problem that I described before, that activists come to the elected members of parliament and say, this is happening, and the elected members of parliament agree with you. And then there is again the same problem happening all over again. I have seen the debate. I remember the live debate in our Dutch parliament when the invasion in northeast Syria took place. So what happened was that a lot of members of parliament proposed something like sanctions, like suspensions of arms sales, like, you know, kick Turkey out of NATO. And the problem with each of these measures is that it either will strand in the system or it's not really possible. Now, what this publication is simply doing is clarifying the elephant in the room. So basically, NATO is not just NATO. NATO is all these countries. And that means NATO
okay,
parliaments.
From this point, but the NATO has principles.
Yes, but this is the problem.
NATO has mechanism of punishment also. And they're having their regularly meeting. I think one is tomorrow or the day after, I don't know, where the ministers of defense will come together. And let's imagine they're sitting together and someone, let's say Greece is saying, Turkey, you are violating one of the rules, and why have you invaded in northern Iraq last week in Gari? Why? Don't they raise these issues in their meetings? I mean, otherwise NATO is losing face.
And
they keep quiet when Turkey is violating the law.
Can I break down that?
Yeah.
In the details, in the components of it. All right. How to compare this? You know. All right. I will take a difficult example, perhaps, or perhaps the wrong example. Well, the Kurds are a people, and they all the Kurds, right? No, that is not really the case. Then you have the leaders. Well, do they really represent all the people? No, of course not. They actually only represent a segment of the people, if you're lucky. Oh, wait a sec. So if I speak with one of the Kurdish leaders, I may not actually speak with somebody who actually speaks on behalf of all these different people on the ground. Here's the problem with this, you know, coming together of the NATO ministers of defense. Let's put this. So on each of these ministers is basically dealing with 2 or 3 different points at that very moment. So he has the instructions of his cabinet. He is not sitting there just on his own. He is listening to all the civil servants of his own Ministry of Defense. And the one thing he is perhaps also listening to, if done effectively, is his parliament. So let me break this down in components. So when it comes to the cabinet where he is coming from, he will have to listen to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and to the minister and to the Prime Minister or the President. Now, they are considering a whole host of different interests and issues. Now, what this publication does is basically bypassing that system by simply going back to the people who are elected. So what if we do it differently, Nilufer? What if we do it differently? So the Minister of Foreign Affairs of, say, let's put a country, Slovakia. Say the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovakia, I don't know who he is. So I'm just taking an example, okay? I'm just taking an example just to clarify that. So the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovakia comes to the meeting and he says, I'm sorry, people, but my parliament has told me that if Turkey is being attacked by any party, that given the Turkish occupation of Syria, Iraq, and all its aggression in the region, we will not defend it if Turkey is being attacked. So he does not come in and waits until somebody raises an issue or whatever. He comes in with simply the information that his parliament told him that. And the problem for him is that, and his civil servants and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and even the Prime Minister will be that it is impossible to ignore such a big statement from a national parliament. Now, what will happen next? First of all, there will be happening two things. One, this will come in national media in different countries. Yeah. Oh gosh, that parliament has said this. And so people in other countries will ask, oh, if they are not, why would we? Because this is the kind of the domino effect that this would have. So the next thing that happens is that there is a debate in the Belgian parliament. I'm just taking an example, say the Belgian parliament, and members of parliament are saying, if the Slovaks are not helping, why would we? And so you basically have to build the pressure on this from the ground up, but in a way that is really effective. And that is what we are suggesting, to basically to bring to the front a very simple question. Would this parliament, would this country still defend Turkey if it would be attacked? Now, and then if you ask that question to people on the street, would you want to have our soldiers go to defend Erdogan? Then everybody will say, are you completely nuts? Of course not. And here's the problem for the ministries of foreign affairs and all of that. Because at that moment, democracy starts working. And members of parliament, they have not only to listen to the ministries and the civil servants, they actually have to listen to the electorate, otherwise they lose their job.
Yeah.
So, and that is really where activists, if done properly, if done cleverly, if the point is made clearly, can make a big difference in clarifying that both to the members of parliament and to the public at large, a very simple question. Yeah. Do you want our military to still defend this Erdogan automatically? No, of course not. Well, clarify that. Clarify that to your government, clarify that to your parliament. Tell them we don't want this anymore. And that is basically what we are suggesting to do. Now, for example, in the Netherlands, we already have right now, as we're speaking, a big scandal on this issue. Because what happened is that the national coordinator on terrorism, he leaked, well, there was a report of him that was leaked. Well, he didn't leak it, of course, he regrets it that it was leaked. Anyway, the report was leaked somehow. And in the report, it was very clear that Turkey is undermining Dutch security simply here in the Netherlands, where I'm sitting. So that is interesting because then it becomes suddenly clear that it is not possible to ignore this. And then you can ask the question, if Turkey is undermining the security right here in the Netherlands, why would we then still automatically defend Turkey if it is in fact, attacking our security by supporting these Salafists and extremists? And they even made a specific connection with one specific act of terror that happened in Utrecht in 2019, where 4 people were sadly killed. So this is very real. Yeah. And normally this memo or this note or this report of the National Coordinator of Terrorism would be moved first to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yeah, and then go to Parliament. Now, you understand that then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would say, we will interpret this report slightly differently, and then move it to the Parliament. The article, in which it was leaked and published, HP de Tijd, says so much in clarity that this would have otherwise happened. Now, members of Parliament are going to the government, which certainly has a problem, like, we want to have this full memo from you, and we want to discuss it and debate it, and we have a month before the elections, and certainly this is an issue. Good. So there you can then interact as activists and say, if Turkey is threatening our security, why would we still guarantee Turkish security? And that is what this publication clarifies, that actually parliaments can do. They can remove the automatic application of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. And there, with that, undermine this security bubble from which Turkey can operate from. Okay. So that is basically what
I think there are some of the comments on the chat room. So yes, most of our friends have questions or comments. So Margaret Owen, hi Margaret, you have a question or comment, isn't? Would you like to say something or ask Johannes your question, Margaret?
Please.
Oh, she left the room.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's sorry.
Are there any other questions or comments on the overview which Johannes gave?
I saw some in the chat, but you have to say which one I will answer.
Well, the one is, no, she was giving a comment that Turkey was not attacked. Okay. Margaret, can you unmute your mic please?
Then we can hear you.
She's now the co-host. Margaret, you might.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Oh, somebody was at Amazon was at the door. Amazon with my mouth. But I've already put my questions on. I mean, I'm fascinated. This is an absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for everything you said.
Thank you.
Because you've got the extraordinary thing about all the different governments, each one. They both have a collective, but actually more important is where they are independently. And as you said, all those people in Parliament are also dependent upon their constituents. So we've now got in the UK a government with an 80 majority of 80. And what is the most important thing? I mean, everyone will be different, but in the UK, I mean, it's incredible. We do Turkey's dirty work here in this country. Unlike Belgium, for example, has gone very far because it actually said the PKK should not be on the terror list. But we now in this country, along with the United States, but for different reasons, are one of the biggest selling of arms, not just selling arms, but actually military training to a Turkey where all the evidence supplied by journalists about how they went into Syria, never to fight ISIS,
okay,
to ethnically cleanse Afrin. They went in there, and all those journalists who even write about this are all in prison or in exile. So, I mean, I just think I don't know enough about all the other member states, but certainly Brexit has had a lot to do with it as well. And all the misinformation, fake news about the refugees, that that Turkey, we were going to be invaded by masses of Turks without visas. Do you remember all that, which got people to actually vote for Brexit? So there are all these reasons in our country why we will never suggest that Turkey should be kicked out of NATO, and also maybe for all of them, but I'm not an expert at this and I want you to come back and explain. Isn't it also the fear of Russia? Because Russia is already selling arms to Turkey, giving them all those F-27, all those planes. And everything that Turkey has done, not just in Syria, but in Libya, in the Eastern Mediterranean, Azerbaijan, Sinjar, what they've done with Yazidi refugees, it's absolutely extraordinary, our silence. That's why we're not going to get anywhere also because of Russia.
I think, Margaret, you raised a very, very important point. So the issue of the S-400 missiles, that are concretely against the NATO, produced against the NATO by Russia, Johannes.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Margaret, for your excellent points there. And you were rightly connecting that there are elements that were Brexit and this issue are interacting. So it's also clear that, for example, the UK government very much wanted to have any trade deal at all. I mean, they were desperately looking for it, and including with Turkey. So that played a role in the UK. Now, when it comes to Russia, we are dealing with that specific issue in this publication because, of course, when you put this down in a publication, you say, you know, we should remove the protection from Turkey because it is threatening us. And automatically the question comes up, what about Russia? Our very simple answer is, that is of no concern for Europe's security. If Russia and Turkey have a problem in Turkey, for example, in some way, it would not be an issue for Europe's security. I mean, let's say, I mean, Van or, you know, any other Diyarbakir or, you know, even Istanbul, for my part. What happens in Turkey is not of, that should not be of that concern for Europe's security. I mean, what is happening in Turkey itself, right? So there is always this idea that somehow Turkey is important to defend Europe, but it is not defending Europe, it is undermining Europe's security. So the question that is being asked in this very simple, is in this publication, a very simple one, why would we defend the one threat against the other threat? That doesn't make any sense at all. So that what we are outlining is not just that, we're also outlining an alternative strategy for Europe and the US to build a more secure environment in our southern neighborhood. And this is something that is actually already developing. And countries, NATO countries like France and Greece and Cyprus, or Cyprus is not a NATO country, but EU member state. I mean, they are part of that. Egypt is part of it. You know, other countries in the region are part of it. And this is a new development that basically has one of its purposes is precisely to basically reduce the threat that is coming from Turkey. But it is also a good way to create a bit more stability in that part of the world for Europe and NATO and the US to click in that cooperation and actually bring that what is kind of being assumed with Turkey's NATO membership. So the point is that Turkey's NATO membership is being assumed to be helpful for Europe's security and kind of counterbalance against Russia. It doesn't work like that anymore. It works together with Russia. It has deals with Russia, and Russia would actually be happy to put a bit more pressure, I think, on Turkey if it wouldn't have this NATO protection anymore. They could do so. And at that point, basically, the one threat for Europe's security would be able to deal with the other threat for Europe's security, and it would not be an issue for us anymore. And it would be less of an issue for all the countries around it. And by that, automatically, our security would be enhanced. Why? Very simple. The history proves it. The Turkish regime supported ISIS and helped to create the refugee stream. Both issues, we mentioned this as examples in our publication, both undermined the stability and security of Europe. So it is clear that by reducing the Turkish threat in the region, automatically you get more security in Europe. So basically, it is important to put Turkey on a leash. But what this publication does is that it operates within the legal possibilities. So we're also within the political possibilities. So there are many campaigns, and I've seen many by them since 2014. I've seen many campaigns that are well-intended, but not very effective because they are very difficult to implement. This is something that can actually be implemented. This can be done. And there are people who are raising hands, so I quit talking.
No, I haven't seen any other.
I see two participants raised hands. So I'm quit talking.
Oh, here, yes.
Yeah, I see John Harvey raising a hand.
Oh, okay. John, please.
You are muted, Mr.
Yeah,
Harvey.
you must unmute your microphone.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harvey. You're still muted. So can somebody help Mr. Harvey to get unmuted if that is still necessary by the...
Okay, now, yeah.
There you
are. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right, fine. My main reason for being here is that I have a niece married to a Turk and living in Turkey. Now, what concerns me is, I think, that as far as the as far as English UK people are concerned, they are more concerned with the human element than with the overall strategy for Europe. Now, if there is one thing that exercises British minds at the moment, it is what you can call the Nazarene stroke Graviola problem. And it raises the question as to whether British expats who are no longer protected by the European Union or anything as powerful as that are in danger of becoming pawns in the wider scenario. Yeah. Now, does the panel think that that is a possibility and that we should be looking for our nearest and dearest getting caught up in this whole situation? Because if Article 5 isn't working, will it get back on to the personal dangers that people are in? And will we be thinking about that?
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. And there's another one, Mr. Sweeney. I think, Johannes, we should collect first the comments and question, and then you give your response. Steve Sweeney, please.
Hello, yeah. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So my question is, in 2019, I spoke at a very large demonstration in London, which marked the 70th anniversary of the foundation of NATO. Tayyip Erdogan was in town at the time, and it was, it was quite lively, but the message was very, very clear at the time. And the message was no to NATO, and it was calling for NATO to be disbanded. And so my question really, NATO is an imperialist war machine. Turkey is operating as it's battering ram in the Middle East, and we've seen it in Rojava, I was in Iraqi Kurdistan very recently and saw the impact of its wars there. And also it's carrying out the same kind of thing in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh. So this, it's carrying out these wars on behalf of imperialism. So Turkey is acting exactly as a member state does. So the NATO member states don't really seem to have any interest in stopping Turkey. So Tayyip Erdogan is not operating independently of these forces. He's acting on their behalf. And I think the argument is that Turkey is essentially a military base for the imperialist countries. And I'm quite interested in this, and I've read your document and I've listened, but it seems to be a kind of almost like a legalistic and bureaucratic method to resolve what is essentially a political problem. And it comes down to an analysis of what the nature of NATO is and its future existence. But I guess, how confident are you that there is the political will to use Article 5 to this effect? And also bearing in mind that not all of the NATO states, when we talk about democracy, I don't think there's really any democracy within NATO at all. Not all the NATO member states are equals, and there's very, very clear power dynamics within the organization. So how do you tackle that particular issue as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
I first want to, you really need to answer now first these questions, otherwise I kind of lose the thread, I'm afraid.
No.
First, very quickly, Mr. Harvey, I think that at the moment, actually, people from the West should not be in Turkey in general. I think it is a dangerous environment, and this has been proven the case in many cases. And if people would act with a bit more awareness, which is, I understand, difficult for some people, and also when there are family ties, it's even more difficult, which I respect. But in general, I generally would say, if you don't need to go there, don't. Because it is a dangerous environment as such. Now, I think if parliaments would make such measures as I suggested, first of all, is aimed to save lives, to save many lives in the region, as Mr. Sweeney very clearly described. But obviously, it could indeed have some risk in principle for people concerned. So I would hope that the government would take that into account. But that obviously is also a responsibility for the government. But then we are entering a different debate, as you will understand. So coming back to Mr. Sweeney, and I need to address a number of points here, because I've seen these points raised by other people as well. And I first of all respect you that you are an activist and are involved in this situation, and I very much thank you for that. And when I previously spoke about NATO, I emphasized the fact that it is not one body, there is not one NATO will, because NATO is the sum of parts, and many of these parts are not in the same position, they are juxtaposed. And even within these parts, there are parts against each other, like, the parliaments versus the civil servants. And in that sense, a typical British series, Yes, Minister, is actually very educative for this situation. Because there you see the minister with the political will, and then the will of the ministry going head to head every time, right? And in a sense, this is happening all over the place. And the interesting thing of that series was that it was actually based on expertise and experience of people who worked in the system. So they knew very well that this is, in a comical way described, a very real thing. Now, what I am basically saying is that this is not a bureaucratic method. This is a very political method. The problem with the other approach is like, trying to get Turkey out of NATO, or trying to get sanctions implemented against Turkey. These are seemingly political, but actually very bureaucratic measures against Turkey. What I am suggesting may seem bureaucratic, but is actually very political, because it would simply require a statement by an elected parliament, which is extremely political. Now, I understand that there are people who simply say we should say no to NATO. I respect that point of view. I don't agree with it, but I respect that point of view. This is not the issue here. The issue is not whether you and I can agree to the yes or no NATO. The issue is a very different one, and on this we can agree, I think. The issue is, how do we make sure that there are not more victims and more victims of this aggression by Turkey? So what we are trying to do is simply suggesting one way of that is likely, as we see it, an effective way to deal with this threat against all these peoples who are dear to us in one way or another. Now, and also to protect ourselves, our own security here in Europe at the same time. Now, let me make one thing very clear, and let me simply put a rhetorical question out there. I can send, because I got a lot of questions from different peoples, from different organizations on this, not just from Kurdish corner. But my question, like, will this work? Is this effective? And so on. My question is also, the methods used so far, have they been effective? And if we are very, very honest, and I'm saying this to every single movement and action group and so on, so I'm treating everybody equally here. We are very honest, it has at best been very partially effective or not effective at all. So we need to go for something that actually uses the system, even if we don't like the system, uses the system to the end that we want to achieve. Now, as I said, we can always differ on the system itself, but it is there. We cannot change it, but we can try to help people by working, basically by using the system almost against itself, but that's not really the intention here, because in our reasoning, NATO would actually get stronger from this, more secure by this approach. But then again, NATO would then be, and in that sense, you might like this actually, NATO would then focus on the own security of the NATO member states. What serves our own security? It is not about expansionism, it is about defense, it's about security. And well, the question here of this publication is, what serves our security? And the answer is trying to make sure that Turkey is no longer entitled to an automatic application of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty.
Good. Johannes, there's another question from Goran Abdullah. Do you see the question in the chat room? To what extent it would be short-sighted for NATO to marginalize Turkey if there's a possibility that it would become a behaving partner in the future if Erdogan finally goes?
First of all, I hope that you can repeat the question. I want to say to Mr. Sweeney, who invites me for an interview for his newspaper, I would be happy to. Then my suggestion is that he contacts the Center for Kurdish Progress in order to get in touch with me.
Good.
So now then, what is the actual question that you asked?
To what extent it would be short-sighted for NATO?
Yeah.
You remember the question? Okay.
Yeah, I can read it now. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I can read it. Yeah. Short-sighted for NATO to marginalize Turkey if there is a possibility it will become a behaving partner in the future if Erdogan finally goes. Now, here's the thing. Actually, our consideration is that Turkey is at this moment marginalizing European security and the security of the region around it. And that is the first thing that we need to consider. All the other considerations come after that, because the primary function of NATO is to create security in NATO, in the North Atlantic area. Now, and then the next thing is that in principle, this measure would not necessarily marginalize Turkey, because Turkey has a choice. If this would happen, Turkey would have a choice, either to pull back and to tone down and to behave, and then to get back in good graces with the NATO member states and have Article 5 restored for it, and the normal application of Article 5 restored for it, or not. And in that case, Turkey would marginalize itself. Now, any new Turkish government, because Turkey would not be kicked out of NATO in this scenario, any new Turkish government basically could make a choice again, to behave or not to behave. If behave, it could become a normal NATO member state again, of which we should in principle not be against as such. It is not Turkey as such that is the problem. I mean, the problem is not in every individual Turkish person, right? The problem is not in the simple the soil of Turkey or anything of that. The problem is in the Turkish regime and how it is, aggressive again in the region and threatening our security. So there, a next government, say this great, interesting mayor of Istanbul would become the president of Turkey, say. Probably.
Why not a Kurdish one?
Oh, why not? I mean, I would love that, but I am politically realistic, right?
Yeah. Me too, Johannes.
Yes, this is the whole point of this publication, to act within the realms of political possibilities. And in that sense, it's idealism with realistic means, and realism with an idealistic purpose.
No, Johannes, I'm really not idealistic. I mean, we have, as Kurds, we were fighting Turkey more than 40 years. Turkey is the second biggest member of the NATO.
Yes, that is true. But here's the thing. It is pointless to have this second biggest member of NATO. And by the way, what does it mean? I will come back to that. If it at the same time is threatening the security of NATO. So, and this is basically the point that we are making. What is the point of it? If we keep it in the same state as now with this automatic protection based on Article 5, if it is at the same time threatening our very security, it doesn't make any sense for us. It doesn't make any sense for us. And the question again and again is a very simple one, coming back to the people, to the common man on the ground, on the street, and say, would you like to see our military defend this Turkish regime? And the answer from people would be no. And this is a very important point. Why? Because our militaries in all the normal NATO member states are subject to democracy. Ultimately, they are subject to democracy. They are subject to parliaments. And that means that the opinion of people should matter in how we deal with this issue. If people are against it because they feel that it is wrong, they feel that it is not helping their security, that should matter for how we are dealing with this issue. And the fact that they have the second biggest army in NATO actually is then not so relevant. And furthermore, the question is also, what does it mean? I mean, they were not able last week to subjugate one mountain in northern Iraq. So how effective is that army actually? I mean, from a purely military point of view, if you are NATO and you look, you don't consider any human or security implications or whatever, you look purely from a military point of view. So this kind of look. Even then, it doesn't make any sense because the quality of the army is not the equipment, but the quality of the total army, so to say, how it functions. And clearly, it doesn't function very well. So, I mean, the point is that from whatever angle you take this, you always come down to the same point, namely, when our security is threatened in this way, and when this aggressive behavior is continuing, it is not good for us. It doesn't make any sense for us, any sense at all, to say, oh, you are automatically protected by us.
Okay, so there's another question, Johannes. So would you not say that the aggressive nature of the Turkish government has emerged from the views of its people?
That's a very, very good question. I would say half of its people at best. And there's an interesting issue here. So in the last elections, last couple of elections, there was a very interesting point that quite some people said, hey, how did Erdogan get his majority? He didn't get that actually from the, from Turkey proper, from the people in Turkey itself. A serious part of that majority, that was only a very slim majority at the end of the day, was not coming from Turkey, but was coming from Germany, from the Netherlands and other places, simply by Turks abroad. And there is a problem in terms of integration here in Europe, where actually the latest reports and consideration in national parliaments are coming in very importantly, is that the agenda, the explicit agenda, and this report from the National Coordinator on Terrorism, Combating Terrorism in the Netherlands, points to that Turkey is deliberately blocking better integration and stimulating Salafism and extremism in Turkish communities abroad. And it is also so that the Dutch parliament in an investigation concluded loud and clear, and we are pointing to that investigation in our publication, loud and clear that members of the Turkish community here feel often also intimidated by the Turkish government. So we can see how basically the Turkish government is basically creating a situation in which not actually the real majority of the people in Turkey is represented, but has created a situation in which they simply have a way to keep in power. But it is not the same as really representing the majority of all the peoples of Turkey. And especially when we now see, the Turkish parliament is becoming a sham. When so many MPs are simply removed at will by this oppressive regime. So the question should be framed differently, I think, is how can we usher effective pressure on the Erdogan regime so that it again becomes a regime that has to take the actual situation in Turkey and the needs of the Turks and the Kurds and all the peoples in Turkey into account. And that is what we are actually trying to achieve.
Good. I think we should come to the end of the discussion, but I would like to remind you, the friends from the Center for Kurdish Progress asked me to ask you, they want to take a screenshot. If you are not interested to be in the screenshot, you can shut down your cameras. The other thing, I think this discussion, and particularly your publication, is very important. However, we define the NATO, some say it's imperialistic instrument, some say it's a war machine, but in the end, the NATO is existing since more than 70 years, and it seems it will exist for some decades, unless we have alternative, we people from the grassroots of civil society organizations. But nevertheless, it's important to look for any opportunity to make changes, democratic changes in the NATO, and in this frame, I think your publication, which raises clearly that it's possible to remind the NATO of Article 5 that Turkey is misusing the Article 5. So what would you suggest to ask people who are working in alternative field to convince the NATO that Turkey is really by itself a threatening country? So what should we do? You say you raised the balance between the elected and non-elected power balances in the NATO. So we should then, who are the elected with whom we should speak and try to convince, we as people who want to make changes in the NATO?
I think there is a number of things you can do. But the purpose of this publication is for activists to have an instrument as well as member of parliaments, to have an instrument to really do something very concrete. And not simply ask the government to do something concrete, but that they themselves can do that. This is the power of this instrument. And so what can people do? First of all, I think it is very important that they read the publication, understand the whole point precisely and well, so that they are able to convey that message to on several levels. First of all, that they can spread it to like-minded people as themselves, and organizations and churches and NGOs and trade unions and whatever. What you have? Many types of organizations that have some consideration for the human situation. So this is one. The second thing is to ask them, and to do yourself, to say, look, can you get this point to your member of parliament or to your parliamentary group, depending on what country you live. I mean, when you're in the UK, you have really your own MP. In other countries, you have proportional representation. So you will, for example, contact the group in the parliament that is, close to you, in whatever way. So that you basically reach out to the elected, but don't try to do that just on your own, although you can always send this publication to somebody. But try to raise awareness within the structures that you know, and perhaps some structures that you can reach out to, that you may have contact with, and that you simply spread this publication. Say, look, do we really want to continue in this way? Or do we want to see some changes there? And do we really want our men and women in uniform to go to Turkey to defend this Erdogan regime? Do we really still want to have our taxpayer money guaranteeing that? No, of course not. So we should tell our members of parliament that we have this opinion. And if trade unions start to repeat it, and other bodies start to repeat it, then it becomes something that people will have to listen to at some point, because they'll want to be re-elected after all. And also, they want to really not just, they know that they will not be elected or re-elected simply on the single issue, but they want to stay in good graces with everybody. So they will rather listen to it than not listen to it. Because they know that they are, at the end of the day, not elected by the civil servants, but by their constituents. So, and that is really where this publication aims to, is to for activists to have an effective method to spread that other people will be able to understand, to read, and to use. And it can be applied across the political field. Because I understand that when I'm looking to the Center of Kurdish Progress, most people here will be more or less on the left. But I can guarantee you this publication is also very interesting for people who have a more of a conservative mindset, but who are rightly concerned about, for example, about the Islamist tendencies and Islamist extremist agenda of the Turkish regime. And who also don't want that soldiers of their country will defend such a regime. So you will find in this publication a way to build bridges with many people of many different inclinations and convictions. And I think this is very important, that you find a way that is not simply locked up in one particular political stream. And I respect all the political opinions, this is not the point, but in this case, we need to come together to find a common way and a common method that can be applied across the aisle, across the political spectrum, because our goal is not to make our political point, but our goal is to bring security to both the region and to Europe.
Well, I think this report, I have read the report beforehand. I think it's giving us very, very important arguments in which we can use when we criticize Turkey, which is also misusing its membership in the NATO. Particularly since 1985, Turkey was backed by Article 5 of the NATO by defeating the Kurds in the last 40 years. And with this report, we have now more a legal frame in which we can accuse Turkey and bring another face of Turkey, which is really not in line with the convention and principles of the NATO, and particularly not Article 5. And I think you have done a great work, Johannes, you and your team from Sallux. And it's offering us a very important argument, particularly for us as Kurds, to say, well, Turkey has not attacked countries, so Turkey is attacking other countries, and by this is violating the NATO's principles. And I think we should insist to convince the elected elements in the NATO to put more pressure on Turkey. Otherwise, Turkey really, under Erdogan, it's becoming more and more threat, not just for the Kurds, for the people of Middle East and Europe and other parts, and North Africa and other parts of the world. And I think this discussion and your expertise this evening was very important, giving us some new perspectives, how to act even in the NATO structures. Because as civilians, as citizens of European countries who are members in the NATO, we can have influence in on the elected organs in the NATO. So I do believe that. Thank you so much, Johannes, for you and your team, and thank you for all of you who listened more than 1 hour to our panel debate this evening, and thank you for the Center for Kurdish Progress for offering this opportunity for all of us. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I really enjoyed this, and thank you for everybody who participated, watched, and asked questions. The questions were very good and very apt. Thank you so much.
So thank you.